I was reaching for my lipstick when my fingers brushed against something that shouldn't have been there. A folded piece of paper tucked deep in the corner of my purse. The ballroom is spitting around me, champagne bubbles rising in crystal flutes, string quartet playing something romantic and perfect. Marcus was across the room, charming my father with stories about his promotion at the law firm. Everything was exactly as we'd planned it, except for this paper in my hands that made my blood run cold. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The handwriting was unmistakably mine, the same loopy cursive I'd practiced in high school, the same way I'd dotted my I's with tiny circles instead of dots. But the words made no sense. Don't marry him? You know why. Trust yourself this time. I stared at it until the letters blurred. I had no memory of writing this, none at all. The worst part wasn't finding the note. It was the immediate, gut-deep recognition that something inside me had been trying to warn the rest of me. I folded the paper quickly and shoved it back into my purse as Aunt Diane approached with her third glass of wine and that particular smile she wore when she was about to say something inappropriate. "Sweetheart, you look absolutely radiant," she gushed, though her eyes were scanning the room for drama. "Marcus is such a catch. I mean, after that whole mess with your last boyfriend, we were all so worried you'd never find someone suitable." She paused dramatically, waiting for me to ask what mess she meant, but I already knew. David, the photographer who'd moved to Portland without telling me, the one who'd left me questioning everything about my judgment in men. "Thank you, Aunt Diane," I managed. My voice sounded strange and distant even to myself. The note felt like it was burning a hole through my purse. "Have you seen the dessert table? The macarons are from that place downtown." She wandered off, sufficiently distracted by the promise of imported French pastries, and I was alone again with my thoughts. The ballroom suddenly felt too warm, too crowded, too bright. I made my way toward the ladies' room, needing space to think, but Marcus intercepted me halfway across the dance floor. "There's my beautiful fiancé," he said, sliding his arm around my waist with practiced ease. He smelled like expensive cologne and the single malt whiskey he'd been nursing all evening. "Your mother wants to get some photos by the fountain before the lighting changes." I nodded mechanically, letting him guide me toward where my mother stood directing the photographer like she was staging a magazine shoot. Mom had been planning this engagement party for 3 months, ever since Marcus proposed at the country club in front of half the city's social circle. She'd chosen everything from the color of the linens to the font on the invitations. I'd mostly just shown up and smiled when directed. "Gorgeous couple," the photographer said, adjusting his lens. "Let's try a few with the fountain in the background. Sarah, can you tilt your head slightly toward Marcus? Perfect. Now, Marcus, if you could just..." He continued giving directions, but his voice faded into background noise. I was thinking about the handwriting, about how certain I was that it was mine even though I couldn't remember writing it, about how many times over the past few months I'd started to say something to Marcus about our timeline, our compatibility, our complete lack of deep conversation, only to let the moment pass. How many times I'd told myself I was just having pre-wedding jitters. "Sarah?" The photographer was looking at me expectantly. "Could you give me a real smile? You look a little distant." I forced my mouth into the shape of happiness just as Marcus's hand tightened possessively around my waist. The cameras flashed, capturing what would probably be a beautiful engagement photo that completely failed to show the growing panic behind my carefully applied makeup. After the photos, I excused myself and finally made it to the bathroom. The ladies' lounge was empty except for the attendant, who was folding hand towels with the kind of meticulous attention that suggested she'd been doing this job for decades. I locked myself in the furthest stall and pulled out the note again. The paper was expensive stationery, cream-colored with a slight texture, the kind I kept in my desk at home for thank you notes and formal correspondence. But when had I written this, and why couldn't I remember? I studied every word, every letter formation. It was definitely my handwriting, but something about it seemed different, more urgent. The pen had pressed deeper into the paper as if whoever wrote it, even if it was me, had been upset. "Don't marry him. You know why. Trust yourself this time." I stared at it until the letters blurred. I had no memory of writing this, none at all. The worst part wasn't finding the note. It was the immediate, gut-deep recognition that something inside me had been trying to warn the rest of me. I folded the paper quickly and shoved it back into my purse as Aunt Diane approached with her third glass of wine and that particular smile she wore when she was about to say something inappropriate. "Sweetheart, you look absolutely radiant," she gushed, though her eyes were scanning the room for drama. "Marcus is such a catch. I mean, after that whole mess with your last boyfriend, we were all so worried you'd never find someone suitable." She paused dramatically, waiting for me to ask what mess she meant, but I already knew. David, the photographer who'd moved to Portland without telling me, the one who'd left me questioning everything about my judgment in men. "Thank you, Aunt Diane," I managed. My voice sounded strange and distant even to myself. The note felt like it was burning a hole through my purse. "Have you seen the dessert table? The macarons are from that place downtown." She wandered off, sufficiently distracted by the promise of imported French pastries, and I was alone again with my thoughts. The ballroom suddenly felt too warm, too crowded, too bright. I made my way toward the ladies' room, needing space to think. But Marcus intercepted me halfway across the dance floor. "There's my beautiful fiancé," he said, sliding his arm around my waist with practiced ease. He smelled like expensive cologne and the single malt whiskey he'd been nursing all evening. "Your mother wants to get some photos by the fountain before the lighting changes." I nodded mechanically, letting him guide me toward where my mother stood directing the photographer like she was staging a magazine shoot. Mom had been planning this engagement party for 3 months, ever since Marcus proposed at the country club in front of half the city's social circle. She'd chosen everything from the color of the linens to the font on the invitations. I'd mostly just shown up and smiled when directed. "Gorgeous couple," the photographer said, adjusting his lens. "Let's try a few with the fountain in the background. Sarah, can you tilt your head slightly toward Marcus? Perfect. Now, Marcus, if you could just..." He continued giving directions, but his voice faded into background noise. I was thinking about the handwriting, about how certain I was that it was mine, even though I couldn't remember writing it. About how many times over the past few months I'd started to say something to Marcus about our timeline, our compatibility, our complete lack of deep conversation, only to let the moment pass. How many times I'd told myself I was just having pre-wedding jitters. "Sarah?" The photographer was looking at me expectantly. "Could you give me a real smile? You look a little distant." I forced my mouth into the shape of happiness, just as Marcus's hand tightened possessively around my waist. The cameras flashed, capturing what would probably be a beautiful engagement photo that completely failed to show the growing panic behind my carefully applied makeup. After the photos, I excused myself and finally made it to the bathroom. The ladies' lounge was empty except for the attendant, who was folding hand towels with the kind of meticulous attention that suggested she'd been doing this job for decades. I locked myself in the furthest stall and pulled out the note again. The paper was expensive stationery, cream-colored with a slight texture, the kind I kept at my desk at home for thank you notes and formal correspondence. But when had I written this, and why couldn't I remember? I studied every word, every letter formation. It was definitely my handwriting, but something about it seemed different, more urgent. The pen had pressed deeper into the paper as if whoever wrote it, even if it was me, had been upset. "Don't marry him. You know why. Trust yourself this time." What did that even mean? This time? As opposed to when? As opposed to David, who turned out to be everything my friends had warned me he was? As opposed to college boyfriend Trevor, who cheated with my roommate? As opposed to high school Marcus, who... Wait, high school Marcus? I dated someone named Marcus in high school. Marcus Winters. Not Marcus Hamilton, my fiancé. But that Marcus had been different. Controlling, jealous. He'd isolated me from friends, questioned every decision I made me feel like I was constantly disappointing him. The relationship ended badly when I had finally worked up the courage to break up with him senior year. I stared at the note again. Could this be some kind of subconscious connection my brain is making? Some buried instinct trying to surface? Because now that I was thinking about it, there were similarities. The way Marcus Hamilton questioned my career choices, suggesting I might be happier in something more stable than graphic design. The way he'd gradually inserted himself into my social plans until most of my free time revolved around his preferences. The way he'd convinced me to move in with him by making it seem financially irresponsible not to, then slowly taken over decorating decisions until my apartment felt like his space with some of my things awkwardly placed around. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Where are you? Your dad wants to toast." I folded the note and put it back in my purse, but I didn't throw it away. Something told me I was going to need it later. When I emerged from the bathroom, the party was in full swing. The dance floor was crowded, the bar was busy, and everyone seemed to be having the kind of
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Thank you all for being here tonight. The microphone squealed with feedback, and I waited for it to settle before continuing. Marcus and I are so grateful for your love and support. The words felt foreign in my mouth, like I was reading someone else's script. I looked out at the sea of faces, all turned expectantly toward me. My college roommate Jessica was near the back, raising her glass with a smile that seemed forced. My cousin Emma was at table 6, checking her phone. Marcus's business partner was already looking bored, probably calculating how much longer he'd need to stay to be polite. I've been thinking a lot lately about what it means to really know someone, I heard myself say, and immediately felt Marcus stiffen beside me. This wasn't the short and sweet thank you he'd scripted for me. About trust and honesty and being true to yourself in a relationship. The room was quiet now, sensing that something unplanned was happening. My mother's encouraging smile was becoming strained. Marcus's father looked confused. But I couldn't stop. The note in my purse felt like it was radiating heat, and words I didn't know I had were spilling out. Sometimes we think we know what we want, but we're really just accepting what we think we deserve. My voice was getting stronger now, more certain. And sometimes it takes something unexpected to make us realize we've been settling for less than we're worth. Marcus stepped closer to me, his hand reaching for the microphone. "Sarah, maybe we should—" "I'm not finished," I said, pulling the microphone away from his reach. The room was completely silent now. I could hear the fountain splashing in the background, the distant clink of glasses being set down on tables. I found something tonight that made me realize I need to be honest with all of you, and more importantly, with myself. I reached into my purse and pulled out the note. My hands were shaking as I unfolded it, but my voice remained steady. Someone left me a message tonight. Someone who knows me better than I thought I knew myself. I looked down at the paper, at my own handwriting staring back at me. It says, "Don't marry him. You know why. Trust yourself this time." The silence that followed was deafening. I could see shock, confusion, and something that looked like relief flickering across different faces. Marcus had gone completely pale, his jaw working like he was trying to form words that wouldn't come. "The handwriting is mine," I continued, my voice echoing through the ballroom. "I don't remember writing it, but I recognize the truth in it. I've been ignoring my instincts for months, telling myself that doubt was just fear, that cold feet were normal. But this note, whether I wrote it consciously or not, is telling me what I've been afraid to admit." Marcus finally found his voice. "Sarah, you're having a panic attack. You need to sit down. We can talk about this privately." "No."
Sarah, I need to tell you something. Can you call me when you're ready? It's about the note. I called her immediately, stepping outside onto the hotel's quiet terrace where I could speak privately. Jessica answered on the first ring. "Oh my God, Sarah, are you okay? That was the most incredible thing I've ever witnessed, but I was so worried about you." "I'm fine," I said, and realized I actually meant it. Better than fine, actually. "But what did you mean about the note?" There was a pause, and I could hear Jessica taking a deep breath. "I need to confess something. Remember your bachelorette party last month? The one where we all stayed at my apartment and drank way too much wine?" I remembered. It had been a small gathering, just my closest friends, and we'd ended up having one of those deep, emotional conversations that only happen when everyone's guard is completely down. "You started talking about Marcus that night. Jessica continued, about how you sometimes felt like you were losing yourself, like you couldn't remember what you wanted versus what he wanted. You were pretty drunk and you got really upset. You kept saying you felt like you were making a huge mistake but didn't know how to get out of it. My heart was starting to race. What else did I say? You asked for paper and a pen. You said you needed to write yourself a note, something you'd find later when you were sober and back in Marcus mode, as you called it. You wrote for like 10 minutes really intensely, and then you folded it up and put it in your purse. You made me promise not to let you throw it away or look at it until you were ready. I stared down at the note in my hand, memories starting to surface like bubbles rising to the surface of water. Flashes of that night of crying in Jessica's kitchen while her other friends rubbed my back and told me it was okay to have doubts. A feeling desperate to communicate with my future self, to leave myself a message that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. I remember bits and pieces now, I said slowly. I was so scared that I'd talk myself out of the doubts, that Marcus would convince me I was just being emotional like he always did, so I wrote myself something I couldn't ignore. You were brilliant, Jessica said. Drunk Sarah was apparently smarter than sober Sarah was willing to admit. You knew you'd need proof that your feelings were real, that they weren't just wetting nerves or cold feet. You knew you'd need evidence you couldn't rationalize away. We talked for another 20 minutes, Jessica filling in more details from that night that I was starting to remember. How I'd talked about the way Marcus corrected me in public, how he'd gradually taken over decisions about our shared life, how I felt like I was performing the role of happy fiancé rather than actually being happy. When I hung up, I felt a profound sense of gratitude toward my past self. She'd known, even through the haze of wine and fear and social pressure, that future Sarah would need an intervention. She'd found a way to reach across time and save me from a marriage that would have slowly erased everything I was. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was my mother, and I decided to answer. "Sarah, Elizabeth, what on earth were you thinking?" Her voice was tight with mortification. "Do you have any idea how this looks? The embarrassment you've caused? Marcus is devastated, absolutely devastated." "Mom," I interrupted. "Did you see his face when I was speaking? Did you see how he reacted?" "He reacted like any man would when his fiancée has a public breakdown and humiliates him in front of everyone he knows. He called me hysterical. He tried to grab the microphone away from me. He told me I was being emotionally unstable. Does that sound like someone who's concerned about my well-being or someone who's angry that I'm not following his script?" There was silence on the other end of the line. My mother had witnessed the whole thing, had seen Marcus's mask slip just like everyone else had. "Sweetheart, you're under a lot of stress. Wedding planning is overwhelming for everyone. Maybe you just need some time to think clearly." I am thinking clearly. For the first time in months, I'm thinking clearly. And I realized I was about to marry someone who doesn't actually like who I am. He likes the version of me that agrees with him and doesn't cause problems and looks good at social events. But the real me, the one with opinions and doubts and dreams that don't align perfectly with his 5-year plan, he was systematically trying to eliminate her. My mother was quiet again. Finally, she said, "Your father and I spent a lot of money on this party, Sarah, and the wedding deposits. I'll pay you back, every penny. I'd rather be in debt than trapped in a marriage where I have to apologize for existing." After I hung up, I sat in the silence of the terrace for a long time, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. My phone continued buzzing with messages, but I ignored them. There would be time later to deal with the fallout, to handle the practical matters of canceled weddings and returned gifts and disappointed relatives. Instead, I thought about the woman who'd written the note. Drunk Sarah, terrified Sarah, intuitive Sarah, who knew that sober Sarah couldn't be trusted to save herself. She'd found a way to reach across time and save me from a marriage that would have slowly erased everything I was. The note had saved me from more than just a bad marriage. It had saved me from a life where I stopped trusting my own instincts, where I let someone else's voice become louder than my inner wisdom. It had saved me from becoming the kind of woman who apologizes for taking up space in her own life. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in my new apartment, a small but bright space that I had chosen entirely on my own, furnished with things I actually liked instead of things that looked impressive to other people. The note was framed on my desk, a reminder to trust myself, even when it's scary, even when it's inconvenient, even when other people think I'm making a mistake. Marcus tried calling a few times in the days after the party, alternating between anger and manipulation, trying different approaches to get me to come back. But every time I was tempted to second-guess myself, I looked at that note and remembered the woman who had been desperate enough to write it. She'd known something I'd forgotten, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is disappoint other people in order to save yourself. That sometimes love isn't about making someone else happy at the expense of your own soul. That sometimes the voice trying to warn you is coming from inside, and the smartest thing you can do is listen to it. The woman who wrote that note had trusted future me to be brave enough to act on her warning. And finally, I had been. I'd chosen myself over everyone else's expectations, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. 6 months after that night at the hotel, I was sitting in my favorite coffee shop when I saw him. Marcus walked in wearing the same charcoal suit he'd worn to impress my father, scanning the room with that familiar calculating look. My stomach dropped, but I didn't run. I had learned something about myself in these past months. I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. He spotted me in the corner booth and walked over with the confident stride of someone who believed he still had power over me. "Sarah, you look good." He slid into the seat across from me without being invited, that same presumptuous behavior that used to make me feel special and now made my skin crawl. "Sarah," I kept my voice neutral, my hands steady around my coffee cup. "What do you want?" "I've been thinking about us. About that night." He leaned forward, using the intimate tone that used to make me melt. "I realized I may have been too controlling. I've been working on myself, seeing a therapist. I think we could try again, do things differently this time." I studied his face, looking for genuine change, genuine remorse. What I saw instead was the same manipulation, just dressed up in therapy speak. He'd learned new words, but the underlying assumption remained the same. That I was someone who could be managed, convinced, won back with the right combination of charm and pressure. "Do you remember what you said to me after I took off the ring?" He looked genuinely confused. I was upset. We both said things we didn't mean. "No, Marcus, you revealed who you really are when your control slipped. And the thing is, you were wrong. I have done better than you. I've done better by learning to be alone rather than accepting less than I deserve." His expression shifted, the mask of contrition sliding away to reveal irritation underneath. "You're being dramatic again."
This is exactly what I'm talking about. You blow everything out of proportion. There it was. The dismissal, the gaslighting, the immediate invalidation of my experience. 6 months ago, that tone would have made me question myself, wonder if I was overreacting. Now, it just confirmed every instinct that had screamed warnings I'd been too polite to hear. "I'm not being dramatic," I said calmly. "I'm being clear. And the answer is no. I'm not interested in trying again." He sat back in his chair, and I watched the calculation happening behind his eyes. He was cycling through his usual tactics. Charm had failed, manipulation had failed. Now he was moving toward intimidation. "You realize everyone talks about you, right? About what you did at the engagement party? People think you're unstable, unhinged. It's going to follow you wherever you go." The old Sarah would have been devastated by this, would have worried about her reputation, about what people thought. The new Sarah had learned something valuable. The opinions of people who'd rather see me trapped in an unhappy marriage than cause a social scene weren't opinions worth caring about. "Let them talk," I said. The people who matter understood exactly what they were seeing that night. The people who don't matter never mattered anyway. His jaw tightened. "You're making a mistake, Sarah. You think you're so independent now, but you'll realize eventually that you need someone. And when you do, the decent men won't want someone with your kind of baggage." I almost laughed. This was his final card, the last attempt to make me feel like damaged goods who should be grateful for his interest. It was so transparent now, so obviously manipulative, that I wondered how I'd ever fallen for it. "Marcus, I need you to listen carefully because I'm only going to say this once. I would rather be alone forever than spend another day pretending to be someone I'm not for your comfort. I would rather be judged by strangers than live with the constant judgment of someone who claims to love me. And I would rather be single and happy than married and slowly disappearing." I stood up, gathering my things. "Don't contact me again. Don't show up at places you think I'll be. Don't send messages through mutual friends. We're done. And we've been done since the moment I found that note." As I walked toward the door, he called after me. "You'll regret this, Sarah. You'll realize what you gave up." I turned back one last time. "The only thing I regret is not trusting myself sooner." Outside on the sidewalk, I pulled out my phone and blocked his number, something I probably should have done months earlier. Then I called Jessica. "You'll never guess who just tried to win me back with the power of personal growth and thinly veiled threats," I said when she picked up. "Oh no, Marcus? Please tell me you didn't fall for whatever line he was selling." Not even close. It was actually kind of liberating to see him try all his old tricks and realize they don't work on me anymore. It's like I've developed immunity to his particular brand of manipulation. Jessica laughed. "Good for you. How are you feeling?" "Free," I said, and meant it completely. Absolutely free. The months since the engagement party had been challenging in ways I hadn't expected. Beyond the obvious awkwardness of canceled wedding plans and returned gifts, I'd had to rebuild my entire social world. Some friends had been understanding, even supportive. Others had made it clear they thought I'd made a terrible mistake, that Marcus was a catch and I was lucky to have had him. Those were the friendships I'd let fade away. I was learning to surround myself only with people who celebrated my courage rather than mourned my lost opportunity. People who understood that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from something that looks good on paper but feels wrong in your soul. I'd also had to face some uncomfortable truths about myself. Why had I been drawn to Marcus in the first place? Why had I ignored so many red flags? A therapist I'd started seeing helped me understand the patterns, the way childhood experiences had taught me that love meant accommodation, that keeping the peace was more important than honoring my own needs. But the most important thing I'd learned was to trust my instincts even when they were inconvenient, especially when they were inconvenient. That note I'd written to myself hadn't just saved me from a bad marriage, it had taught me that some part of me always knew the truth, even when my conscious mind was busy rationalizing it away. 2 weeks after the coffee shop encounter, I got an unexpected visitor at my apartment. My mother stood at my door holding a bottle of wine and wearing the expression she'd worn when I was a teenager, and she was preparing to deliver a lecture about responsibility. "We need to talk," she said, walking past me into the living room. I poured us each a glass of wine and waited. My relationship with my parents had been strained since the engagement party. They'd been cordial, but distant, clearly still processing their disappointment and embarrassment. "Your father and I have been discussing what happened. At first, we were focused on the humiliation, the canceled deposits, the social awkwardness of it all. And now?" I asked. "Now I keep thinking about your face during those last few months with Marcus. How you'd come to family dinners and barely speak. How you seemed to shrink every time he corrected you or answered a question that had been directed at you. How you stopped talking about your work, your friends, your dreams." She took a sip of wine, and I saw something in her expression I hadn't seen in a long time: maternal protectiveness. "I realized we were so excited about the idea of you being settled, being married to someone successful and stable, that we stopped paying attention to whether you were actually happy.
We saw the ring, the engagement photos, the party planning, and we assumed that was enough. Mom, let me finish. That night at the hotel, when you stood up and spoke your truth in front of everyone, I was mortified. But later, driving home, your father said something that stayed with me. He said you looked more like yourself in that moment than you had in months. Even angry, even scared, you looked alive again. I felt tears starting to form. This was the conversation I'd been hoping for but hadn't dared to expect. I'm proud of you, she continued. It took courage to walk away from something that looked so perfect from the outside. It took wisdom to trust yourself when everyone else was telling you that you were making a mistake. And it took strength to rebuild your life on your own terms. We talked for 3 more hours about patterns and expectations and the difference between settling down and settling for less. About how sometimes the people who love us most can become accidentally complicit in situations that aren't good for us simply because they want us to be safe and secure. When she left, she hugged me tighter than she had since I was a teenager. "That note you wrote yourself," she said, "that was the smartest thing you ever did." A year after the engagement party, I was featured in a local business magazine for the graphic design firm that I'd started. The article included a photo of me in my studio, surrounded by projects that reflected my actual aesthetic rather than what I thought would impress other people. I looked confident, creative, authentically myself. The day the magazine came out, I got a text from an unknown number. It was a photo of the article with a message, "Saw this and thought of you. So proud of how far you've come. A friend." I never found out who sent it, but I didn't need to. What mattered was that somewhere out there, someone had witnessed my transformation from people pleaser to self-advocate and wanted to celebrate it. I kept that original note framed on my desk, a daily reminder that sometimes the person trying to save you is yourself, speaking across time from a moment of clarity to a moment of confusion. That sometimes love isn't about making everyone else comfortable. It's about honoring the truth of who you are, even when that truth is inconvenient. The woman who wrote that note had been braver than she knew. She'd trusted future me to be strong enough to act on her warning, to choose authenticity over approval, to value my own voice more than social expectations. The note had been right. I did know why. I'd always known. I just needed permission to trust what I knew and the courage to act on it. Now, finally, I had both. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.